Delighted to introduce Franco Bianchini, who is Professor of Cultural Policy and Planning at Leeds Beckett University. Franco has a long history of involvement with the European Capital of Culture initiative. He was appointed in June 2001 by the President of the European Parliament to the selection panel responsible for the designation of Cork as the 2005 European Capital of Culture. In 2006, the Minister of Culture of Slovenia appointed him to the panel responsible for the selection of Maribor as Slovenia's choice for the 2012 European Capital of Culture. He was also a collaborator from 2003 to 2009 with Liverpool Culture Company on the development of the European dimension of the successful Liverpool bid for 2008. And from 2010 to 2014, he was part of the team which prepared the successful bid for the 2019 title by Matera, a city in southern Italy, which won a competition involving 20 other cities, including Venice, Pisa and Palermo. With the announcement that Leeds is to bid for European Capital of Culture 2023, Franco's talk is certainly of the moment. Today, he will be speaking to us on the topic of what is the European Capital of Culture and what it can do for a city. Professor Franco Bianchini, thank you.
Thank you, Susan, and for this opportunity also to open a very interesting lecture series. And also, as Susan said, it's a very appropriate moment because the steering committee, the steering group for Leeds European Capital of Culture bid has just been announced, so the debate is very much alive in the city at the moment. What I will be talking about is more what cities in different ways have got out of it, have got out of this title, why they have actually gone to the considerable expense, both in terms of money and time, and officer energies and time, and to go for this kind of competition. But I will start first with a bit of a description of the aims of the European Capital of Culture and how it came about, and also what it is. As you can see here, it's now a year-long program of events, and the interesting thing about it is that progressively it has become much more open. It started really being focused on the arts in a rather narrow way, but now it really includes nearly everything. It includes debates on intellectual and scientific topics. There is increasingly a lot of stuff on science-art crossovers. There is increasingly a presence of popular culture, including sports. So the brief for Leeds is much more open than it was when the event started in 1985. The year still celebrates artistic excellence, cultural cooperation, and dialogue. Also, there is a focus on European citizenship, a shared sense of citizenship and cultural diversity. It was started by a former actress, the Greek Minister of Culture in the socialist government in Greece in 1983, Melina Mercouri, and initially the title went to well-established cultural destinations in terms of tourism, heritage cities like Athens, Florence, Amsterdam. West Berlin was a bit of an exception. They got the title in 1988 to also celebrate their, I think it was their 700th birthday. And Paris, 1989, was jointly with the celebrations for the bicentennial of the French Revolution. Then there was a real break with Glasgow, 1990, a real strategic watershed in a number of ways. And it was Glasgow, it was the first city to extend the event to 365 days, which is what Leeds would be informally expected to do. It's not actually written anywhere that you have to provide a festival over 365 days, but that is now the common assumption. Obviously, in doing that, that presents certain challenges because it's very difficult to sustain the attention of the media and also of the people of a city and of the cultural sector for 365 days. So that's an issue also for discussion, quite interesting. I'm not going to talk about all of them. Dublin in 1991 was one of the more disappointing ones, as was Madrid in 92, overshadowed by more important events like the Olympics in Barcelona and the Expo in Seville in the same year. Antwerp in '93 was one of the most interesting in the history of the European Capital of Culture because of the bravery of the artistic director who inserted in the program very controversial projects to do, for example, with the war in the former Yugoslavia. For example, he commissioned a play called Sarajevo, and the director of the play, the playwright and the director of the play could not actually attend because they were blocked in the siege of Sarajevo at the same time. So it was very much an event in '93 focused on issues that a lot of people in Antwerp were uncomfortable in discussing. It was a lot of it, for example, was about the rise of a very strong anti-immigrant right-wing party called Vlaams Blok, or Flemish Bloc, which had obtained 25% of the votes in the municipal elections in 1992, just before the Year of Culture. And Antwerp, through the event in '93, explored its past reputation as an open city, as a tolerant open city. So I'm going to skip the others, but you can see how the title evolved. It went for the first time to a city in the former communist bloc only in 1999 with Weimar. In 2000, it was a bit of a mess. Obviously, in 2000, everybody had to do something special. Britain, of course, built the Millennium Dome, and we built lots of other Millennium projects, including the National Centre for Popular Music in Sheffield, which is now a student union. And of course, the European Capital of Culture also celebrated in the same way by creating a network of 9 cities, some of them from outside the EU, in countries which even today are still outside the EU, like Bergen in Norway, Reykjavik in Iceland. And it didn't really work very well. They were meant to do things together, to collaborate, to create a kind of joint program. But in reality, there was at most bilateral or trilateral cooperation. It's a bit much to expect also of local authority officers who are not trained in this kind of things, not only to have to deliver an international project like the European Capital of Culture, but then to have to cooperate with also 8 other European cities. It was a bit much, perhaps a bit unrealistic. Then the European Union decided to change the name. It was called until 2000 European City of Culture, and it became European Capital of Culture. It's a little bit unclear what the change means, but the way we interpret it, for example, in the case of Matera, as Susan said earlier, the Italian city which won the title for 2019, was we interpreted capital in the sense of responsibility towards other cities, so that you're not there just to for your own advantage, but you're there in a way to represent the UK and to also share as much as possible with other cities, certainly in the region, in the rest of the country, but also in Europe according to some kind of international European vision. This is the idea, but then it hasn't quite perhaps been implemented that way by the cities that have won the title since 2001. In 2001, they started with couples of cities, 2 port cities, Porto and Rotterdam in 2001, heritage cities like Bruges and Salamanca in 2002. Then we reverted to just 1 city with Graz in Austria in 2003. Genoa and Lille in 2004 were among the most successful. Cork in 2005 was not. In fact, probably I didn't vote for Cork, I think, in the selection process. Later, the event developed with, again, occasionally couples of cities and sometimes just 1 city, as in the case of Cork in 2005, Patras in 2006. In 2010, there was also the inclusion of Istanbul, again, another city from a country outside the EU. We already know which cities have got the title until 2019. It has to be decided from 2020 to 2033. As you can see from the list of the cities in the 2010s, some of them are very small and very unknown. So there is an emphasis increasingly on using this to give an opportunity to cities often in marginal parts of Europe. For example, Košice, a city near the border with the Ukraine in Slovakia, or Umeå, a city on the border of Lapland in the north of Sweden, very strong for Sami culture. or indeed Leeuwarden. Leeuwarden, city in the Netherlands, who got the title in 2018, is the capital of Friesland, the northern part of the Netherlands. Again, a rural area, relatively isolated. Again, like Umeå, a strong program focused on co-creation and on digital culture. In fact, using digital technologies as a way of encouraging people to participate in cultural production. So Leeds will participate in the competition for 2023 together with Hungary. As far as I know, the Hungarians, it's totally unclear yet which cities are interested in Hungary at the moment. The government is not exactly the most pro-EU government in the EU. It's even less pro-EU than the UK government. So they're not particularly publicizing this as an opportunity for Hungarian cities. So as far as I know, nobody has yet expressed an interest. No city has yet expressed an interest in Hungary. At least that was the situation in July when I checked last time. The two UK cities, despite this kind of narrative about Euroscepticism in Britain, but I have to say the two UK cities have been groundbreaking in the competition for different reasons. Glasgow, definitely for linking the title, the European Capital of Culture, with urban regeneration for the first time, and also for being the first city to really construct a very solid public-private partnership, which put together a substantial budget, which was around £53 million at the time. And also, as I said, the first city to program the event over an entire year. Liverpool, equally important. It is, to date, the city with the biggest investment in the, not in the capital budget, but in terms of the revenue budget, the budget for the operational budget, 142 million euros. Also, substantial benefits for the city in terms of cultural tourism. It has become a cultural tourism destination probably as a result of the event. A very strong program in deprived communities across the city called the Creative Communities Program, and a very innovative research program on evaluation led by the two universities jointly, John Moores and Liverpool University, which have set up, with support, financial support from Phil Redmond, have set up an institute called the Institute of Cultural Capital that has produced a kind of 360 degrees approach to evaluation, looking at every possible impact, ranging from media impacts to educational, to tourism, image impacts, economic impacts, social impacts, health impacts, and so on. So a model which later has been adopted also by the European Commission, and they are encouraging every city to use a version, an adapted version of the Impacts 08 model for their evaluation. So the interesting thing is that the rules have changed for the competition from 2020 to 2033. So Leeds will operate with a different set of rules. As you can see from this 6 different criteria here, they all really emphasize internationalism and the European dimension. So, including the 6th one, to attract the interest of a broad European and international public. This is very much linked also with the objectives of the funding program, Creative Europe. It's about trying to create more of a European market for European cultural products, to produce a program which it is not just of interest to people in Yorkshire and in Britain, but of wider interest in Europe. So this is a challenge for Leeds. It's going to be a big challenge to have a very strong European dimension and international program. All the 6 new criteria highlight this European dimension, this internationalism. Another challenge, which I have not listed here, is that now one of the compulsory requirements of the European Capital of Culture bid is to also have a new or an up-to-date cultural strategy for the city. So Leeds also, in parallel with preparing the bid, will have to develop a new cultural strategy. And again, it's a bit of an imposition, but obviously we have to see it as an opportunity in terms of refocusing perhaps expenditure on culture, in terms of thinking which social groups within the city are not perhaps benefiting or participating enough in cultural life, And certainly in terms of thinking strategically, which is, I think, what the European Union are particularly interested in, thinking strategically about the links between arts and cultural policy and every other aspect of urban policy in the city. So, transport, youth policy, social policy, economic development, tourism, city marketing. How do they interlink? Are the different officers in charge of these things talking to each other? In what way can the universities in the city help in this process of building a cultural strategy? What about the links with business and with other stakeholders in the city? So, despite big funding problems, especially after the 2007 economic downturn, several cities have had to cut their budgets because their financial plans pre-2007 then had to be modified as a result of the crisis. Despite big funding problems, there is a lot of evidence that the European Capital of Culture is very popular. And also a lot of evidence that it achieves quite a lot in terms of symbolic urban regeneration, which means urban regeneration at the level of the image of a city, both for its own citizens and externally in the outside world. So evidence of the popularity is, for example, that it has been copied by Latin American cities. There is now an American Capital of Culture scheme, which includes every country from Mexico down to Chile. There is also an Arab Capital of Culture scheme, although the list of some of the cities is a bit dubious. So I believe the event in Tripoli last year must have been cancelled because of the political situation. And also Sirte now obviously is controlled by ISIS, although it wasn't in 2011, so probably it went ahead in 2011. But as you know, Sirte is one of the 3 capitals of IS at the moment. So the impact doesn't seem to have been, well, anyway, it's a big problems there. The different cities have used the event in different ways. Some, like Glasgow, Lille, Liverpool, Genoa, have definitely used it to counteract images of industrial decline, a kind of story, a narrative of industrial decline and economic restructuring. Glasgow, with its slogan, Glasgow smiles better, so it is miles better than you think or than it used to be, trying to project an image of rebirth through this project, quite successfully, I would say. Other places have used it to try to link tangible heritage, their built heritage, with contemporary creativity, to show that they were not just cities of old buildings, but also cities of contemporary creative industries. This is the case of Bologna in 2000, an event very much focused on the theme of media and communication, with Umberto Eco, the semiologist, as one of the main intellectuals behind the program, and a very, very heavy involvement of the university, which is one of the oldest in Europe. The same in Graz in 2003, with several very experimental architectural projects as part of the program of the event. Other cities have been cities with a fairly high economic status that wanted to fill the gap, let's say, between their high economic status and their rather secondary, at least in European terms, cultural status. Those are some of the cases. One of the cases is Stavanger, the Norwegian oil port city that was the twin of Liverpool for the 2008 title. Leeds, in part, an aspect of the Leeds bid, perhaps, is this as well, that the city is a city which is doing relatively well, at least not everybody in the city, of course, is doing well, but it is one of the cities in the north which is relatively economically successful by comparison with neighbors in Yorkshire and in other parts of the north, but it is also a city that, in a way, it's not recognized enough for its cultural assets, for its cultural strengths, at least at international level. So maybe it could be part of the same motivation for Leeds. Other places have used it to counteract marginality, economic or geographical or political marginality. And other places have used it to celebrate multiculturalism and cultural diversity as an asset, including the case of Marseille in 2013, a city which has tried to rediscover its vocation as a gateway to Europe from North Africa and the Middle East, not without, of course, political controversies. The City Council was not particularly in favor of that vision, but which was, on the other hand, supported by the business community and by the département and the region. So some conflicts in Marseille. So there are also conflicts in general in the European capital culture. One of them is usually between politicians and creative teams. Sometimes there is too much interference by politicians, and that is one of the ways if you want to make sure that you don't win the title, one of the surest, best things you can do is to make sure that the politicians you bring along to your audition talks all the time, yeah? For example, in the final for the Italian competition, Lecce, an Italian city in the south, in Apulia, brought along the president of the region, an excellent politician, very left-wing, very clever, but it spoke for 18 minutes out of a 30 minutes presentation, and apparently that was the single most important reason why they didn't give the title to them. So this issue of interference by politicians is sometimes a big issue. For instance, in the case of Maribor, it was mentioned by Susan at the beginning, the Slovenian city that got the title in 2012, the mayor, a former policeman, decided to rewrite large chunks of the artistic program, which wasn't a particularly good idea. He was particularly keen on Madonna and tried to persuade her to have a concert, a gig during the year, but without success, I gather. So one really important thing is to use it as an opportunity to make the achievements of the European capital of culture more sustainable, to have a program of long-term investment. There is also sometimes some confusion about who owns the event, and then there is a need for mediation between different interests that are listed there. There is also sometimes a problem around the definition of culture in the European capital of culture concept. It is often too dominated by a rather narrow definition of high culture, does not include enough popular culture and sport. It does not build enough. There is often not a reflection on local values and intellectual traditions. So what we need to do in Leeds, clearly, is to reflect both on the intangible heritage, the popular culture of the city, but also probably on some of the intellectual strengths of the different universities. What can they contribute to the program? There are many operational issues. I've already mentioned the question of training in international cultural cooperation, the problem of a year-long cultural event. You need moments of pauses, moments of reflection and absorption, which perhaps need to be spectacularized themselves. In the case of Matera, for instance, we propose that in the artistic program, there should be regular moments of contemplation where absolutely nothing happens. And the city is very good for contemplation because it's built on a canyon. It's a city of cave dwellings built on a canyon. So it is actually very beautiful to simply look at this canyon and at a kind of park, which is totally empty, a kind of nature reserve on the other side of it. So we are trying to celebrate the issue of reflection, contemplation, of doing nothing as an aspect of the program. We don't want to bombard people with information, with events all the time. So these are some of the interesting operational issues. There are also some big questions like, are we overestimating the importance of this? It's not as important as the Olympics. Some European capitals of culture which have been underfunded have actually not produced the benefits that one would have expected to produce. Some of them have not been certainly sufficiently festive and transformational. Sometimes you go to a European capital of culture and you wonder whether there is not anything going on there. Sometimes there's not a sense of occasion. So we need to make sure that that is also part of the strategy to create a sense of occasion, of festivity. And also how European is this event. Sometimes it's more focused on local urban regeneration priorities. So I'm just repeating some of the things here. It's clearly a big opportunity to develop a new vision of the future of the city, and also to widen the mental and spatial horizons of citizens, to encourage them to try new things, to try new cultural forms, to discover parts of their own city and also of the surrounding areas, because it's not limited to the city. We can certainly work with a concept of city region, parts of their own city that they normally wouldn't go to. And Leeds, with its strong emphasis on being a child-friendly city, also could very much use this notion of play, of the playful and playable city, as a key aspect, I think, of the artistic program. So this is a list of some tips, really, for what you should do, perhaps you shouldn't do, just based on my experience with Matera for the competition we just finished last year. Clearly, some of them are very obvious, like understanding the brief and the jury. But also, it is very important to respect other candidates, to understand, as I said earlier, the responsibility of being a capital, sharing everything. For instance, one of the things they very much appreciated about Matera was that we were not secretive. We put online, we made available everything right from the beginning. So all the preliminary benchmarking studies, the bid itself, other cities kept it secret. We made available a TV channel from the city to go and film events going on in the other competing cities. So that was partly a kind of act of generosity, but it was actually explicitly mentioned in the report by the jury as one of the factors that gave the title to Matera, because they showed a kind of sense of cooperation rather than competition, although we were actually competing as well, but it was something that they appreciated. And also the fact that showing management and communication ability in the bidding process is absolutely essential. The EU are desperate, as you can imagine, to try to improve their image. So they want a city that is able to actually communicate its message throughout Europe, also at bidding stage. So we would need to invest in Leeds a bit also in communication capacity. So I'm just finishing the last two slides. One is about the international narrative for the Leeds bid, which I think is going to be one of the crucial things. If Leeds develop, and it will have to develop, a new cultural strategy, updating the existing one, this cultural strategy will have to have an international dimension. We'll have to have a kind of international cultural strategy, or let's say cultural foreign policy, which has to be built, in my view, on a mapping of the existing international links of the City Council. For example, the City Council is twinned with various cities in Europe, including Milan, I think, including Dortmund, perhaps. I'm not sure. Anyway, somebody will tell me later. Also, we need to perhaps put into the mix also the international links of universities, of the cultural sector, of businesses, and also of diasporic communities in the city itself. Also, we need to position probably this international narrative of the Leeds bid in relation to two really important debates that are going to dominate politics in Britain in the next 2 or 3 years at least. Regional devolution, the Northern Powerhouse or power failure debate, and the EU referendum. So these two debates are clearly absolutely very important. My guess is that Leeds will try to develop a kind of more positive narrative in relation to Europe, otherwise probably won't win. And it's going to be interesting to see how that relates to the regional devolution and the EU referendum debate. Lastly, some of the possible benefits. One of the most important things that city get out of this is that they have for a while a shared goal that gives people a bit more confidence and ambition, and something that brings people together, galvanizes people. So that is obvious, but it is usually one of the benefits of participating in this kind of competition. Others, again, equally obvious, more pride in the city, national and international recognition. celebrating the strengths of the cultural sector. There are big opportunities for also physical urban regeneration in the city, new international links, the cultural strategy that I've already mentioned, stronger cooperation between different stakeholders, opportunities to develop cultural tourism, strengthening the creative industries, big opportunities to improve the skills of the cultural sector. So that's going to be, I think, one of the most important legacies. It's a big learning and training opportunity, and I think the universities have to play their part in offering short courses, summer schools, other courses to build capacity. Social regeneration, building social capital in communities which at the moment are also need a new kind of focus to develop social capital. And also, clearly fun, having a program which is, as I said earlier, playful, that encourages people to participate, and that includes many different forms of culture, not only high culture. Okay, so I've finished. Thanks very much.
Franco, that was fascinating. We have some time for questions, so if you would like to raise your hand if you would like to ask Franco anything about his talk. Anyone like to start us off? Yes?
Yeah, Franco, what's the key to the artistic programme of any of these cities? Are we talking about individuals or committees, or what's your experience of who's actually the driving force? In Matera, for example.
Yeah. Normally, the artistic director who puts together the artistic program for the bid is normally sacked after and then they appoint another one. That's a sort of typical story, even if the European Union actually don't like that, because they want to have as much continuity as possible. Yeah, I think you need different kind of figures. You do need a team, or led by, perhaps coordinated by one person with a very strong vision. The concept has got to be clear. The concept has also got to be international. As I said earlier, it's got to have a strong international dimension. Whether that person who's put together the concept is the right person to then implement the concept is a different story, because often people who have got strong visionary conceptual skills are not the best people to implement this kind of project. But I think it would be good to keep them on board. In some cases, you had a little bit of a dictatorial artistic director, very good but a bit dictatorial, but that dictatorial tendency was compensated by other people in the team who were able to bring in ideas and projects from the cultural sector in the city. Yeah? That's absolutely vital. If the jury notices that this is a program put together by very good festival directors, artistic directors from outside, with very little connection with the city, you're not going to win. And I think I'm absolutely convinced there's no point for a place like Leeds taking part in all of this if we're not really trying to win it. Yeah. So you would have to. Okay, you can appoint somebody who is with a very strong vision, but it needs to be compensated by other people with different skills who are able to bring in ideas either through open calls, or there are a number of different ways of doing that. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, Franco, one of the cultural successes recently was the cultural programme for the Grand Day Park. And as you know, I'm particularly interested in relating sport and arts together. Is there, do you think, in Leeds a potential for making that one of the features of the bid?
Yeah, I think so. It's kind of an original, quite original thing. Because I was influenced by your work, obviously we worked together on this. I did propose a tiny kind of little project in the case of the Matera program on art and sport. That's gone down extremely well with the jury and with the people in the city. So we are, we did something, for example, on the ancient Olympics, because some local athletes participated in the Olympics in Greece in the 5th century BC and so on. So it's something about that and some other projects of that kind. So I think that could be one of the strengths of a Leeds bid. Mm-hmm.
Anyone else? I would like to ask whether you think that the bid has to be different in an environment where we have concerns about migration, refugees, and a lot of anti-European sentiment.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how do you think that changes any future bid?
Well, I personally would be in favor of challenging head-on all these different things. I mean, this is the perfect opportunity because it is a cultural project, and I think in cultural projects you are allowed a little bit more latitude, and I think the politicians would be prepared to support something which is challenging. I think the city could make a statement that Leeds and Yorkshire actually are different from the London media, political and economic establishments, that they don't have the same view about the European Union. I think we have to be critical, of course, of the European Union, but that's not the problem. I mean, my impression is that the European Union and the jury are actually absolutely fine even with projects which are incredibly critical of the EU as it is at the moment, provided that it is a kind of constructive criticism, provided that it is a criticism that, let's say, suggests alternatives of some kind. What I think would be a mistake would be, as you say, producing a program which is focused on fear of immigrants and a program which has got nothing to do with Europe. Clearly, would be a complete waste of time because it's not within the criteria. So it just there's no point at all. But I mean, doing something which is about a different kind of Britishness or Englishness, in a big city which is relatively far away geographically from the capital. I think that's much more interesting. But it's something that the steering group obviously will discuss. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Do you think that having the city region rather than just Leeds itself as part of the bid, provided it could be a united narrative, would make it more successful?
Yeah, my view is yes. This is a controversial point because I remember at the consultation meeting in January 2014 at the town hall, there were several people who expressed a completely different point of view. Yeah, my view is that it would be to the advantage of Leeds, and provided we don't define the city region in a ridiculously large way, like Venice did. That's the reason they lost. They defined the city region as the 3 regions of the northeast of Italy, which is absolutely vast. And so they pissed off everybody in that area because Trieste and Verona, other cities that wanted to bid, were told not to bid because there was a sort of a city regional bid. And of course the jury rejected it because it was a massive macro region. But they would accept a bid for the Leeds city region. I think that gives making links with Yorkshire Sculpture Park, with the airport in Wakefield, around a theme around sculpture and land art, for instance, is a very, very good idea. Making links with Bradford on all sorts of different things, including also film, media, cultural diversity is also a good idea. So my view is that it should be a Leeds city region bid. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Just following on from that, obviously, Leeds district isn't just the city of Leeds, it's various other communities, Berkeley, Pudsey, Morley, Guiseley. How do you think these areas, which to some locals may compare but still their own towns and their own lines, they just so happen to have been presented by Leeds City Council, don't really want to be part of. How do you think we can integrate them more into a cultural bid?
Well, probably the best way, which is what, for example, some cities have done, like Umeå, Leeuwarden in the Netherlands, and Matera itself. It's to allow this kind of communities, or any community in the city, to produce their own ideas. For example, in Matera, we activated a web community which produced a number of different projects, and the committee supporting the bid was providing small amounts of money to implement these projects, which often had to do with local history, local characteristics, but related to the broad themes of the bid. There were, really very successful projects. One of the interesting things was also that because that is a land of migration, so a lot of people have left because it's relatively poor parts, quite a poor part of Italy. These communities, these neighborhoods, were able to make links with people from their communities who had gone to Argentina, to Australia, to Germany, to other parts of the world. Around 200 different projects were generated that way, and then of course we selected only some of them. But I think basically activating some kind of process of co-decision, co-creation, also through digital means, is probably a good way of activating the different neighborhoods of Leeds. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
I wonder if there could be a bit more focus on the positiveness of the culture on health and well-being.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I know it's implicit in some of the things that you put up there, but whether it could be like a separate bit included in it.
Mm-hmm. The art and sport projects are, of course, one of the interesting ones in Yorkshire. Has got a very strong tradition of working on the idea of movement, counteracting, for instance, obesity, sedentary lifestyle, and so on. That's a very important achievement here. I've noticed that the impact society evaluation suggests that there have been significant improvements in mental well-being in Merseyside for the people who have taken active part. It seems one of the key things seems to be to move from spectating to actually doing something, like taking part in a theatre project or in a community opera, in a visual arts project of some kind, and so on. Actually being involved directly in making things seems to be very beneficial in terms of making new friends. That's one of the key things that emerges from Liverpool. So making new friends, reducing a sense of social isolation, and improving self-confidence, so discovering that you are able to do things that you didn't think you were able to do. So those are some of the things that have been discussed. There is a research unit at Durham University, in particular led by Mike White, who has researched more in detail, the benefits. So I think we could probably look at some of the evidence there and see what kind of projects are particularly effective, and then perhaps learn some of the lessons to develop similar projects for the program.
Yes, last question, Liz.
I just wanted to ask, in this sort of development of a new cultural policy for a sort of city, how, in looking at the other ones in the past, does that, in the light of the sort of money then sort of disappears after the year happens? Looking at other examples, has that cultural policy sort of really continued in the cities afterwards? You talked about maybe Liverpool and Glasgow a little bit. Does that continue, or once the money's gone, does something just revert? Can changes happen in cultural policy that really embed it into the city more than just on money?
Yeah, thanks for asking this final question, because in a way it's the most important question. Right, in Liverpool, a certain level of cultural expenditure, for example, has been maintained because the politicians have understood that the city is now a cultural tourism destination, certainly a destination for cultural tourism as such, arts, museums tourism, but also convention, conference tourism. So they are keeping a level of cultural expenditure which is higher than it was, for example, in the 1990s. In many other cities, though, unfortunately, we have seen a massive drop. And when that happens, which is unfortunately, I would say, the majority of the cities that have gone through this process, a lot of the benefits that were achieved temporarily are nullified. So it's really important to think strategically what are the arguments that one can use to develop a longer-term investment program, right? In the case of Lille in 2004, they were quite clever, and they, even before bidding for European Capital of Culture 2004, they had decided to go for a longer-term program, which was called Lille, still called Lille 3000. It's not going to go as far as 3000, I think, but it was basically, the decision was, we are not going to disband the unit organizing this particular festival for 2004, but we are going to organize landmark events every 3 years, I think, linked with the cultures of emerging parts of the world, to present Lille. It was a bit of a brutal kind of economic development strategy, but nevertheless, you have to respect the clarity of the thinking. So we want to present Lille as a very good place where to invest, because we are 1 hour by train from London, Brussels, and Paris, and we also have cheap land and cheap kind of premises. So that was the strategy, and they have actually implemented that. So they had an event focused on China, another one on India, one focused on Brazil, and so on. So they are continuing. So it is a cultural strategy very linked with a kind of location strategy, and that way they have maintained fairly high levels of cultural expenditure. So I think it's important for Leeds to do that kind of thinking in the new cultural strategy that they are preparing. So what's going to happen after 2023? Why are we doing it? So, what's the long-term thinking?
Okay, I'm sure Franco will be around for a while if anyone would like to speak to him personally. Thank you very much for coming, all of you, and please look out for an invite to our next talk in the series in October, which should drop into your inboxes tomorrow. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.